Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. I'm Tulsi Gabbard, standing in for Tucker. At this point in time, it looks like Republicans are going to take control of the House of Representatives, while Democrats will hold on to the Senate. Now, we've spent all week hearing nothing but pundits pontificating on what actually happened in this election. But if you're like me, you've had enough of that. It's time for us to talk about what happens next. It's time for those who actually got elected to prove to the American people that they're not just politicians, that they actually are there in Washington to take action to protect the interests and freedom of the American people. Now, unfortunately, while in Bali today, instead of delivering a necessary message of unity to all Americans, President Biden chose to attack half the country, once again implying that the only acceptable Democratic outcome is a win for the Democratic Party.
Let me start with a few words about the recent elections held in the United States. What we saw was the strength and resilience of the American democracy, and we saw it in action. And the American people proved once again that democracy is who we are. And there was a strong rejection of election deniers at every level, from those seeking to lead our states and those seeking to serve in Congress, and also those seeking to oversee the elections. And there was a strong rejection of political violence and voter intimidation.
There were no candidates this cycle that were in favor of political violence or voter intimidation or destroying democracy. Joe Biden's message is the wrong approach. Because here's the truth. As long as the Democratic Party and the permanent Washington elite are working hand in hand with Google and Facebook, and as long as Google is allowed to continue to use its monopoly power to skew public opinion in a certain direction, literally manipulating the information that we as voters are allowed to see, then there is no democracy. A recent study by researchers at North Carolina State University found that Google's email service, Gmail, quote, retained the majority of left-wing candidate emails while sending, quote, the majority of right-wing candidate emails to the spam folder. Now, additionally, Google has greatly reduced the visibility of various conservative websites in its search results. Now, Breitbart, for example, found that Google has changed its algorithm so that search traffic to Breitbart declined by more than 60%. As you can see, these kinds of changes can have a major impact on voting. A peer-reviewed 2015 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that big search engines like Google can influence the voting preferences of undecided voters by 20% or more. And we've been hearing a lot of politicians scream and shout about how committed they are to defending our democracy. Stop posturing. Stop fear-mongering. Do something about it. That's what we need right now. Leaders who are actually serious about working on behalf of their constituents and the American people and finding common sense solutions to the many challenges that we face. Now, the reality is the margins of this election across the board are razor thin. No matter how things shake out in the next few days with these election results that have not yet been announced, Republicans and Democrats will have to find a way to work together if there's any hope of getting anything done. Unfortunately, what we're already seeing is both sides hardening their position. Now, we, the American people, cannot afford for Congress to be paralyzed by partisan gridlock for the next 2 years. There's too much to be done. Every person in Congress should see themselves as an independent who is not beholden to any political party, but beholden only to their constituents, the American people, ready and willing to work with their colleagues. It won't be easy, I know. It's going to require leadership, courage, respect, and humility. When I was a Democrat in Congress and I introduced legislation, I always sought out and was able to find Republicans and Democrats who were willing to work together on actually solving problems. It's hard, but it can be done. It must be done. Now, I'm not advocating bipartisanship just for the sake of bipartisanship. It's really about coming together as Americans to work for the best interests of the people that they serve, us, their constituents. There are many challenges that we're facing. Here are a few ways where Congress should make a start. Now, first and foremost, we must secure our borders. We have to use the power of the purse to close the border and make it crystal clear that if you've come into this country illegally through Biden's open door, you got to go back to wherever you came from. If you want to come back into our country, you've got to follow our laws. Now, just a few weeks ago, I was in McAllen, Texas, southern most border, the busiest spot of the southern border for illegal crossings, where Congresswoman Mayra Flores and her husband, a Customs and Border Patrol agent, we walked around and they showed me one of the spots where there's this huge gap in the border wall. Later, as we were driving out, we saw piles and piles of building materials that were purchased for the wall, stacked on the side of the road unused, things that we already paid for. So I asked, why aren't they being used? Well, the Biden administration won't allow continued construction of the wall, but they also won't allow the governor of Texas to use those materials, again, that we already bought to secure their own border. Unfortunately, what's happening in McAllen is occurring all along the southern border. Fox's Bill Malusian reported this weekend from Normandy, Texas, as well as Eagle Pass.
In Normandy, Texas, early Wednesday morning, a massive group of migrants crosses illegally into this tiny town on the outskirts of Eagle Pass. Hundreds of them escorted by the Texas National Guard and Border Patrol in a single file line, stretching almost as far as the eye can see.
Hola, ¿de dónde son? Cuba? ¿De dónde son? Nicaragua. ¿De dónde son? Nicaragua.
The migrants are predominantly from countries that Title 42, a policy that allows authorities to expel migrants on the basis of public health, is rarely enforced on, meaning they won't be expelled to Mexico. At the same time, another group of 400 crossed illegally into Eagle Pass, most of them single adult men.
Over the weekend, the White House forced the resignation of the Commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Chris Magnus. But let's be honest here what this really was. It was an effort to shift blame away from those in power who are the ones responsible for over 2 million people illegally entering our country through the southern border. The president, the vice president, and Secretary Mayorkas. We can't let them get away with this. So the question is the Biden administration really going to actually change its policy and make it clear to people around the world that anyone who comes into this country illegally is going to be sent immediately back to where they came from? Honestly, I don't have much faith that this is going to happen, because if it were, they would have already done it. Now, there is nothing more important in this country than protecting our God-given rights enshrined in the Constitution. These very freedoms and civil liberties, however, are under attack. They have been for quite some time. This new Congress coming in must take this promise that they make when they take their oath of office seriously, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and actually work together to protect our civil liberties and end the gross overreach of government. Get rid of provisions like those in the Patriot Act that allow for secret FISA courts, that allow for warrantless wiretapping of Americans, allow for a no-fly list that has no due process, the use of the Espionage Act to go after political dissidents, and more. They need to exercise their oversight authority to stop this administration's efforts to undermine our freedom of speech and silencing political opponents by politicizing agencies like the Department of Justice and FBI to go after them, and by getting big tech and social media to censor voices that they don't want to hear. A recent lawsuit by the states of Missouri and Louisiana have uncovered troubling evidence that this censorship is occurring. Twitter even scheduled a meeting to debrief top White House officials on quote-unquote vaccine misinformation. Twitter then censored that quote-unquote misinformation, some of which later turned out to be true. In a particularly egregious case, officials at the White House and Pfizer urged Twitter to ban journalist Alex Berenson because he pointed out accurately and correctly that COVID vaccines don't stop transmission of the virus. Now, Berenson's lawsuit unearthed internal communications at Twitter talking at an April 2021 meeting at the White House, one Twitter employee writing that the White House, quote, really wanted to know about Alex Berenson. Another Twitter employee wrote, quote, White House COVID advisor Andy Slavitt suggested they had seen data that had showed Berenson was the epicenter of disinfo that radiated outwards to the persuadable public. Now, within months, Twitter banned Alex Berenson. Facebook, meanwhile, took down a parody account of Tony Fauci after the White House complained. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security's Domestic Terror Unit is targeting parents who are protesting at Board of Education meetings because they're concerned about their kids' education. They dragged nonviolent pro-life activists from their homes in front of their kids.
But if you're not going to let me, then I'll just...
No, I want
want to know why you were banging on my door with a gun.
Hey, let's go back to that.
You're not going to tell me anything? Can I have your name? You're not going to give me your name? You're not going to give me any information?
When my kids go out to the car to go to school and the FBI pulls up, armed, running to the door, and one of them goes to the kids and holds the kids with a long gun aside of my driveway and does not let them go into the house, that is absolutely, as my wife said in the video, unacceptable.
Now, instead of curbing these abuses of power, Congress has enabled them. In order to prevent further abuse of power, Congress needs to use the power of the purse and immediately halt the IRS funding of 87,000 new IRS agents that will be harassing everyday Americans. Now, the IRS has a troubling history of targeting groups and individuals based on their politics. You probably remember IRS Director Lois Lerner specifically targeted conservatives. Congress did nothing to hold her accountable. Now, they must take action now before it's too late, because the IRS is now already one of the most heavily armed law enforcement agencies in the country.
In addition to being accountants, we're also law enforcement officers, which is very interesting because a lot of the special agents that work for the IRS, they don't come from a law enforcement background. We get to do the same things like all the other law enforcement officers do. Things happen, we have to be able to respond, so we have to be ready.
So we teach our agents to fire a firearm to be able to shoot. We teach them defensive tactics, methods of defending themselves and protecting others as well. So they go through that entire process so that not only can they analyze records, but they also have that law enforcement component.
We do carry weapons, we carry handcuffs.
Why in the world do IRS agents need to carry weapons and handcuffs? Most of their work concerns civil matters, not apprehending violent criminals. Now, last but not least, it's important that we remember that foreign policy is domestic policy. We have politicians from both political parties who are the permanent Washington elite and who must be held accountable for what they're doing with our taxpayer dollars and how they're undermining our national security as they push us closer and closer to the brink of nuclear catastrophe. They need to stop giving a blank check to Ukraine and demand accountability for the tens of billions of dollars that they've sent so far. Because the blank check, it's not just for Ukraine. It's for the military-industrial complex who's made trillions of dollars off of our wars in Afghanistan and the Middle East. Now, the Biden administration, they want to hire 87,000 new IRS agents to go over every receipt and every deductible of American taxpayers with a fine-tooth comb, squeezing every penny that they can. The Ukrainian government and their corrupt bureaucrats and oligarchs and the defense contractors who are profiting from all these weapons, the Biden administration requires no receipts at all. Why is this? It's because they know that most of this money, our taxpayer dollars, is going to corrupt bureaucrats. They know this. Their actions expose who they really care about. It's not us. While they're shipping troops and taxpayer dollars overseas, and they are continuing to do so, this administration and Congress are failing to take care of our veterans and service members. As we speak here, we have soldiers who are forced to rely on food stamps to feed their families, soldiers who are living in uninhabitable conditions, and those who are not getting the care that they need for service-related injuries, illnesses, and diseases. Now, if the new Congress takes action on all of these areas, if they solve the border crisis, close the border, if they curb Department of Justice abuse of power, if they shut down this new IRS funding for hiring agents and protect civil liberties, end this unconditional endless funding of the war in Ukraine, and protect and take care of our troops and veterans here at home, they will have accomplished meaningful results for the American people. That's the right approach, regardless of which party controls Congress. Now, Senator Josh Hawley represents Missouri in the U.S. Senate, and he joins us now. Thanks for joining us, Senator Hawley. You've talked about in a tweet recently about how it's time for a change in the GOP, that it's time for new leadership in the Republican Party. And having served in Congress for 8 years, I know how much pressure there is for members of both parties to follow leadership, go in lockstep, vote party line. I think that's really, there's a lot of different issues, but What kind of leadership do you envision for this new Republican Party that gives people the freedom and independence to actually vote their conscience?
Well, we need good, strong, independent leadership that actually listens to voters and doesn't just listen to the Washington lobbyists. And I'll just tell you, when it comes to the GOP, the Washington Republicanism that cares more about Wall Street than it does about working people, it's time for that to come to an end. The Washington Republicanism that's all about adventures abroad, the neoconservatism of these global wars, not focused on working people in this country, it needs to come to an end. I think what voters are asking us to do is pretty clear. Secure our streets. Let's put new cops on the street, 100,000 of them. Secure the borders. Stop the indoctrination of our children and bring jobs back to this country. It used to be you could support a family on one good wage. You can't do that anymore in this country because of the ruinous trade policies that unfortunately both parties have supported. That has got to come to an end. Republicans have got to be the party of working people and working class culture. That's what we're fighting for.
Yeah, Senator Hawley, I think when we look at how many people didn't even show up to vote at all on this last election day, I think that alone sends a really strong message that we're not hearing the pundits address, which is people don't have trust that they actually have public servants there in Washington who are fighting for them, not for the party, but for them to address some of these challenges that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. If you look at who didn't show up, Tulsi, you've got independents who don't like Joe Biden. And they voted for President Obama back in the day. They voted for President Trump, but they looked at the options this year and they're like, nah, I don't like Biden at all. I don't like the Democrats, but I don't trust the Republicans. Why? Because the Republicans weren't offering anything. They weren't saying we're going to secure the border. They weren't saying we're going to put cops on the street. We've got to go out there and make that case. We need new leadership in the Republican Party in Washington. This is why I will not support Mitch McConnell for leader. We need new leadership, but we also need real convictions. That's what we've got to be about going forward.
Thanks so much for joining us, Senator Hawley.
Thank you.
Now, the major cryptocurrency exchange, FTX, which is run by Sam Bankman-Fried, has collapsed and declared bankruptcy. Now, what actually happened is pretty complicated. Later in the week, Tucker is going to have a full investigation on this. But here's what we know for sure. Sam Bankman-Fried was one of the top donors of the Democratic Party this year. In fact, he was the second largest donor to Democrats, second only to George Soros. That money bought Bankman-Fried a lot of access. The Washington Free Beacon reports that just 6 months ago, Bankman-Fried was at the White House consulting on cryptocurrency regulation. Now, at the same time, Bankman-Fried was pretending to be a kind of Robin Hood figure who didn't care at all about money. He shot this promotional video, for example.
The guy you see next to me is the most generous billionaire in the world, and I found him.
Hi, my name is Sam, and this is my story.
Last year, this 29-year-old guy donated $50 million. Next year, he's planning to donate $500 million a year. And next decade, he will probably give away more than $10 billion.
The amount of good that you can do for the future of the world is really large, and it's way more than you can do to actually make yourself happy with anything like that amount of money.
And he is funding everything you can think of. Global warming.
It's one of the biggest problems that we have to tackle together as a world.
COVID-19 preparedness.
We have to be ready for the next pandemic.
There's a lot of speculation right now about the connections between FTX and Ukraine. It turns out that FTX set up a website for users to send cash to Ukraine's central bank. That's led to speculation that the U.S. government might have sent taxpayer money to Ukraine, which then ended up at FTX and ultimately to Democrats. Now, to unpack what we know for sure, we're joined by Miranda Devine. She's a columnist with the New York Post. She joins us now. Thanks for joining us, Miranda.
Chelsea.
Tell us what's going on here.
Well, look, what we know is that this is a cryptocurrency is really a pretty unregulated industry. It's something that Warren Buffett says is an industry of charlatans. And he says it's selling worthless material. It's basically digital currency, doesn't exist. And we have this kid who lives a very bizarre lifestyle in the tax haven of the Bahamas, sleeps on his beanbag when he isn't living in a 10-person polycule, which I'm told is like a throuple, a sort of sexual romantic relationship with a number of people. He somehow became the youngest billionaire in the world, was worth up to $20 billion at one point, and he was shuffling this sort of pretend money around the place and was being feted on the cover of Fortune and Forbes. As you say, he was the second biggest donor to the Democrats for the midterms, and he also donated $10 million to Joe Biden in 2020 to become president. He frequently went to the White House and was really in the bosom of the left. And as you see, he was indulging in all sorts of woke causes, including Ukraine. And why on earth, the American taxpayer is funneling tens of billions of dollars over to Ukraine so that they can fight Russia? And why on earth they would be involved, the Ukrainian government, with this now collapsed cryptocurrency exchange, we need to know. I'm sure that when the bankruptcy trustees come out with all their information, we'll find out a little more. But it's not enough for the Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine to just scoff at questions and call them conspiracy theories. Why on earth was a country at war dabbling with cryptocurrency, which is, everybody knows, is shady?
Yeah, thanks, Miranda. There are so many questions here. I'm looking forward to seeing Tucker's piece on this. Certainly a lot of eyebrows raised. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tulsi.
Now, there's a new Congress that'll be taking over in January, but one thing remains the same. Ukraine's Vladimir Zelensky still wants more of your money. The Biden administration looks like they're going to help him get it. That's coming up next. The American people are struggling financially right now. Nearly everything is costing more, which is directly connected to the war in Ukraine. But our nation's leaders are not interested in peace. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is now on his way to meet with leaders of 50 other countries to announce not a peace declaration, but a new round of funding for Ukraine. Basically, a blank check. The money's not coming out of their pockets, it's coming out of the pockets of the American people. Ukraine's President Zelensky is also expected to speak before the G20 soon to lobby for yet more military funding. He's not interested in peace. He wants more money for war. Now, Biden and his administration have encouraged this attitude by essentially handing over our foreign policy to Zelensky. He gets to make the decisions, telling him, here you go, you've got a blank check. We'll do whatever you want for however long you want. No accountability for any of this. They want to squeeze every penny out of the American taxpayer. They don't care at all how Ukraine and the defense contractors in the military-industrial complex are spending our money. Now, Douglas McGregor is a retired U.S. Army colonel, and he joins us next to talk about this insanity. Doug, it's good to see you. What do you think?
Tulsi, you hit the nail on the head. I think Secretary Austin is making a last-ditch effort to fight back against Ukraine fatigue. The truth is, the Europeans are tired of pouring money into this. They're tired of sending equipment into a black hole. He's going to have a tough time making any inroads. And one of the big reasons is that General Milley, our chairman of the Joint Chiefs, decided to leak his personal advice to the president in the New York Times. And he said, the Ukrainians have probably accomplished all that they reasonably can, and now is the time that they really need to start negotiating. Well, what Milley was really saying in so many words is Ukraine is in a lot of trouble. They have no power, no electricity, no energy of any kind, no fuel, increasingly not enough food and not enough water. And they've taken horrendous casualties, over 100,000 dead and hundreds of thousands of wounded. They're in very bad shape. And the second part of the message is you better start negotiating, because the Russians are preparing for a winter offensive, which is going to be devastating and will be designed to finish off the Ukrainian armed forces and the regime. So on the one hand, you've got the administration that says, let's send more money to this losing proposition, and people are tired of it. And then on the other hand, you have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs who says, well, the game's almost up, so let's negotiate.
Yeah, it's outrageous, Doug, to see how just a few days ago we learned that the Biden administration basically told Zelensky, hey, just make it look like you're open to negotiations, because if you say publicly that you're not willing to negotiate, which we know he's not, then people are going to be less likely to keep shoveling money in his direction. It's interesting when we actually hear the truth that they don't want any of us to hear out loud. Thank you so much, Colonel Doug McGregor. It's always great to talk to you.
Sure, thank you.
Now, one thing we've heard a lot about in this election is ballot curing. Have you ever heard of it? What is it? How can it affect the outcome of an election? We're going to talk about that next. Now, 30 years ago, Rush Limbaugh made an insightful prediction about where our society would end up. Here it is.
Because I'm wearing these ribbons, I care more than any of you about anything. And these ribbons say so. I want you people sitting at home and you people in the audience, look down at your lapel right now. I want you to do this. Put the camera back on me. Do this. When you look down, what do you see? You don't see anything because you're not wearing any ribbons. It means you're a bigot. It means you're a racist. It means you're a sexist. It means you're a homophobe. It probably means you're a white guy. It probably means you're a European. And you alone are responsible for all the ills of America. But I'm not, because I'm wearing these ribbons. I care more than you.
One of the reasons why I left the Democratic Party is because, as you can see, I wasn't wearing all the ribbons. I was condemned for not wearing all the ribbons. The reality is that even if you have 19 of the 20 ribbons, if you don't have that last one, then you're a cast out. You're not welcome. You're canceled. You're done. There is no end to this insanity. You continually have to prove yourself. It's not even a question of tolerance and respect. Live and let live. You have to be an advocate and a champion for their cause, whatever the cause of the day may be. They're trying to divide us. They're racializing everything. They're stoking anti-white racism and actively working to undermine our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution. Now, Rush Limbaugh's prediction from 30 years ago is pointing to exactly where we are today. Now, Joe Kent is running for Congress in Washington's 3rd Congressional District. Now, several news sources have already called the race for Joe Kent's opponent, Marie Perez. But it turns out there's a lot of ballots in this race that were rejected. In just one county alone, 7,000 votes were tossed out. That's more votes than Perez's current margin of victory. Now, additionally, there are thousands of votes that haven't even been counted in this race. Now, essential to a functioning democracy is ensuring that every vote that's cast is counted. The AP's decision to declare the victor when a significant number of those votes cast have yet to be counted, this is the thing that erodes people's faith in the process. What's happening in Washington state right now is not helping strengthen that faith. This issue is so important because if Democrats and Republicans are serious about protecting our democracy, as so many say that they are, they need to come together long before the 2024 election and fix what's broken in this system. There's no room for partisanship here. Now, Joe Kent knows this better than many others. He's dedicated over 20 years of his life in service to this country in uniform, offering to continue to serve now. Joe, it's good to see you. Tell us what's happening there in your district.
It's great to be with you, Tulsi. Thanks so much for having me. So right now, the race is very close, less than about a percentage point. We're only down by about 3,200 votes. There's close to 4,000 or 5,000 that remain to even be counted. However, like you pointed out, there's about 9,000 votes out there that need to be cured. That means people need to go to vote.wa.gov to check their ballot status. If it says that their ballot has been contested, they need to go down to the county auditor's office and probably fix their signature or get a hold hold of me, Joe at joekentforcongress.com, and we'll get a ballot curing team to them, because we do all mail-out ballots here. People have to have their signature verified, and that's usually the primary issue. So I won't concede this race because we're still very much in the fight, but I also won't concede this race until every legal vote has been counted.
Joe, you mentioned that signatures are being examined. I'm just curious, do they have signature experts as the ones who are examining this? Because I think it takes a long time for someone to become an expert in reading signatures. Who's actually doing this?
No, they have hardworking volunteers who I think make their best effort at matching a signature, but this is why it happens so frequently. So I had my ballot contested because of signature verification during the primary. I had to go back down to the county auditor's office and fix my own ballot. Now, the county auditors will make every effort to contact people who've had their ballots contested. They'll send out a mailer, and in some cases they'll call. But these are not experts, like you pointed out. And this is our one check, because it's so easy to obtain a ballot here to vote. The signature verification is about it. But if people aren't diligent and go to vote.wa.gov and check the status of their ballot, their vote could be not even counted.
So, Joe, you've got thousands of people whose ballots have been contested or rejected at this point in time. How much time do they have? How much time are they given to actually go out and verify and make sure that their vote is counted?
Well, every minute really counts, so if people can get it done this week, that helps out a lot. But technically, the election isn't certified until the 28th. But this isn't something that people should wait on.
Wow.
Again, just go to vote.wa.gov to check the status of your ballot.
Thanks, Joe. I think you've shined a light on something a lot of people have never heard of before. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Now, Joe Biden is on his first overseas trip since the midterm elections. And it's going as you'd expect. Gaffes galore. Our Tucker Carlson Tonight medical expert joins us next to talk about exactly what's been happening. Jennifer Say was on track to become the first woman CEO of Levi Strauss & Co. A lifelong liberal. Everything changed for her when she publicly opposed the closure of San Francisco's public schools at the height of the pandemic in 2020. Say then decided to give up her professional future to retain her voice. Now, she spoke to Tucker Carlson about her decision for an episode of Tucker Carlson Today. Here's part of it.
I've been a lifelong liberal. You know, I chose to live in San Francisco.
Levi's a very liberal company,
It's a
at least
very
by
progressive
reputation.
company, and that fit my values. But when I realized that didn't include me, because I took this stance in defense of children, which should have been a progressive value, I thought, you know, my speech was not.
So this was less than 2 years ago.
Yeah, it all started, the very short version is literally as soon as the lockdowns happened and the school closures happened, I was like, no, this is not good. It's not good for children. It's not good for business owners. It's not good for so many people. People can't worship. They can't go get married. You can't visit your loved ones in the hospital. I kept my advocacy to schools because I knew all that other stuff was controversial, but I thought we could agree on kids. You know, that's what I thought we could agree on. And I was very vocal on social media, but then I started to lead rallies and I started to write op-eds. And I was spoken to starting in September of 2020 repeatedly for over a year. You should really stop. Please stop.
On what
Please,
ground?
would you consider not saying these things? It was when you speak. So at the time I started, I was the chief marketing officer, a prominent role. During all of this, I actually got promoted to the brand president, so an even more prominent role. And the feedback was, when you speak on behalf of the company. And I said, but I don't. I'm just a mom.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I have this big job, but I'm not saying it as the Levi's brand president. I'm saying it as a public school mom in San Francisco. But it was a very unpopular view, as reasonable as it sounds now. I don't know if you remember back in 2020 how it was not considered a reasonable view. We were called, anyone advocating for open schools was called a racist. The school board wasn't budging. The teachers unions weren't budging. Public health in San Francisco wasn't budging. All of my friends who sent their kids to private were sending their kids back. So they clearly believed that in-person schooling was better for their children. They clearly weren't too afraid. But somehow they stood by this idea, because public schools were closed for 18 months in San Francisco. Playgrounds were closed for close to 10 months, outdoor playgrounds. It's like madness. And so I didn't care that I was warned. I was like, this is just wrong. And the hypocrisy, because this is also on the heels of everybody making declarations about equality and we're going to fight for equality, right? It's like right after the summer of 2020. And I'm like, you're all lying. You're all a bunch of liars. If you cared about equality, you would fight to get the schools open.
Yeah.
60% of these kids are on free or reduced lunch. That means they're low-income children. If you cared about equality, this is what you would take a stand on.
Now, you can watch that episode right now on Fox Nation. And Jennifer Say's new book called Levi's Unbuttoned is coming out tomorrow, November 15th. Looks really interesting. Now, Joe Biden's big trip to Asia has not exactly gone according to plan. On Saturday, Joe Biden was in Cambodia, but he appeared to think he was really in Colombia.
And I want to thank the Prime Minister for Colombia's leadership in the ASEAN chair and for hosting all of us.
Now, today in Indonesia, Joe Biden struggled to read his own notes.
I can't have trouble reading this. Reuters, Netanya Bose.
Now, this actually makes me really sad to see, but I think more importantly, it's really sad because he's the president of the United States. He's making hugely consequential decisions that are impacting every one of us here at home and the world. Now, Dr. Mark Siegel is joining us now to share his insight on exactly what we're seeing here. Thanks so much, Dr. Siegel.
Tulsi, before I start on this, I want to point out that a year ago on World Kindness Day, you tweeted something brilliant, which is that kindness comes from respect and love, and we're all children of God together. And I echo that sentiment today in a column. And it's very important that we remember that when coming out of a ferocious pandemic and these divisive midterms. But here's the problem. As a decorated member of the military, you also probably agree with me that we have to show the rest of the world strength. Imagine Vladimir Putin sitting there next to one of his big Russian hound dogs watching this, where the president of the United States mixes up Colombia and Cambodia, or at the Asian conference, or at the G20, he's meeting with Chairman Xi, and then he can't figure out the name of a Reuters reporter that he reads off a teleprompter. This signals an alarm to me as a physician. What's the cognitive issues going on here? What is the memory? And I want to point something out as a physician. He had a yearly physical a year ago, and that wasn't transparent. We didn't get a cognitive test then. We didn't get an MRI. All we heard was that his gait was stiffer, which can be due to these problems in thinking and memory. We know he has an irregular heartbeat. That can lead to those problems. Now I want to ask Dr. Kevin O'Connor or other doctors who have examined him, where is the yearly physical now? Remember, we're presenting this face to the rest of the world, to our enemies. He's meeting for 3 hours with Chairman Xi. What is discussed? How much confusion is there? Our enemies prey on weakness, as you know, Tulsi. So I feel kindness for the president tonight. Of course I do, and I respect him greatly. But I want answers, and I want that physical. I'm not his doctor. I've never examined him, but we need some transparency here along with the kindness, Tulsi.
Yes, Dr. Siegel, it's a really powerful message, instructive for us as individuals, but really looking at what the consequences are here. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and expertise on this. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Good night.
Now, we're monitoring incoming results right now coming out of the Arizona governor's race. That race could be decided this very hour. That and more coming to you straight ahead. Now, time flies when you're doing what you love, and tonight is the 6th anniversary of Tucker Carlson tonight, this show. I'm so honored to be here on Tucker's behalf and to congratulate him on the great success that he's seen over the years, and to say thank you to all of you who are choosing to spend your time here with us. Now, I'm sure that Tucker's supporters and detractors alike cannot deny that Tucker is carrying out exactly what he promised to do.
What's the show going to be about? You can judge for yourself, but here's the basic theme of it. People in power tend to lie, not because they want to, but because they can't help themselves. That's human nature. The more power people have, the bigger the temptation to misuse it. The press is supposed to be the watchdog against all of this, and it worked fine for a couple of centuries. But then the press decided they had more in common with certain politicians than with readers or viewers, and that's when it fell apart. We're going to get back to basics here. We're going to hold the powerful accountable, pierce pomposity, translate doublespeak, mock smugness, and barbecue nonsense every night.
And that's about it for us tonight. Of course, tune in each night right here at 8 o'clock to the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Also, I encourage you to tune in to my new podcast, The Tulsi Gabbard Show. Tomorrow, we're having a new episode with a great conversation with Chloe Cole, an 18-year-old girl who has struggled with detransitioning. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Now, here's Sean Hannity.
All right. Did you have fun? Did you enjoy filling in for Tucker?
I did, Sean. How are you today?
I've been doing this for 27 years. I've been blessed. We have the greatest audience in all of TV. Great job. Thank you for being with us.